Welcome. Enjoy the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I noticed the changes gradually at first. Small things, really. The way Lila's hand would slip away from mine during our Sunday walks, how she'd keep her phone face down at dinner. As an architect, I'm trained to spot irregularities in patterns, and the signs were there. Last Sunday, we went through our usual routine. The coffee in our shared thermos had gone cold by the time we reached the duck pond. Lila walked slightly ahead of me, her responses to my comments becoming increasingly monosyllabic. I watched her scroll through her phone, her thumb moving in that nervous way it did when she was distracted. "The Henderson project is finally wrapping up," I mentioned, trying to bridge the growing silence between us. Lila nodded without looking up. The morning sun caught her wedding ring, and I remembered how she used to wave her hand around dramatically after I proposed, making sure everyone noticed the sparkle. Now, it seemed to weigh heavy on her finger. Back at home, I found myself studying our photos on the wall, snapshots from vacations, dinner parties, lazy Sunday afternoons. Her smile was always the brightest element in each frame, drawing everyone's attention like she did in real life. But lately that radiance had dimmed. The marketing firm was demanding, sure, but this felt different. Like she was physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. During dinner, I watched her push food around her plate. Her usual animated stories about client meetings and office drama replaced by long stretches of silence. When her phone buzzed, she practically jumped, quickly silencing it without meeting my eyes. I told myself it was just a phase, that the new job was taking its toll. But deep down, in that place where brutal honesty lives, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The easy rhythm we'd maintained for years had developed a stutter, and I wasn't sure how to get it back on beat. I found Lila on her old leather couch that evening, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her phone screen. She'd been in the same position since I left for the kitchen an hour ago, barely moving except for her thumb scrolling endlessly. The sight was odd. Lila usually bounced around the house, always in motion, always chattering about something. Coming up behind her, I leaned over to peek at her screen and ask about dinner. Her reaction was instant and startling. She jumped like she'd been shocked, clutching her phone against her chest. The movement was so sudden it made me step back. Her laugh cut through the room's silence, sharp and artificial, nothing like her usual warm chuckle. "Just work stuff," she blurted out, but the words came too fast, too rehearsed. My stomach tightened at her response. In our 5 years together, I'd never seen her so jumpy about her phone. Lila typically shared everything about her day. From mundane client meetings to office drama, she'd wave her phone in my face to show me memes or funny posts, completely unbothered by my looking over her shoulder. This was different. The sound of running water should have been soothing, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat as I stared at Lila's phone. Her password, my birthday, granted me access with tragic irony. Each scroll revealed another punch to the gut. Casual good mornings peppered with heart emojis, inside jokes I wasn't part of, plans made in the gaps of our shared calendar. Simon. The name burned in my mind as I pieced together fragments of memories. The marketing consultant from her office, the guy she'd mentioned in passing, whose name started appearing more frequently in her work stories over the past few months. A photo appeared in the chat. Them at some cafe I didn't recognize, his arm draped casually around her shoulder. Her smile, the one I thought was only for me, beamed at the camera. The timestamp read 3 days ago, when she told me she was working late. The shower stopped. My hands trembled as I kept reading, each message driving the knife deeper. Coffee meetings that weren't just coffee. Late nights that weren't spent at the office. The evidence of my unraveling life flickered on the screen in blue text bubbles. I heard her footsteps down the hall, the familiar pattern of her walking home routine. The sound of her humming died instantly when she entered the living room. Water dripped from her hair onto the hardwood floor, each drop echoing in the sudden silence. "How long?" The words scraped out of my throat. Her face crumpled as she sank into the couch, the distance between us stretching into miles. "It's just happened." The lie stung worse than the betrayal. The messages went back weeks. The photos, the meetups, the carefully coordinated deceptions. None of it just happened. Each one was a choice, a conscious decision to dismantle everything we'd built together. Water pooled at her feet, darkening the wood in spreading circles. Her towel slipped, but she didn't move to fix it. I watched the droplets fall, easier than looking at her face. The phone in my hands fell like a bomb, each message a ticking reminder of destruction. The room filled with the weight of unspoken words, the casual "I love yous" we'd exchanged that morning, the weekend plans we'd made, the future we'd mapped out, now revealed as a mirage. My throat closed around the questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Our wedding photo hung on the wall behind her, mocking me with frozen smiles and promises that apparently had expiration dates. 5 years of marriage dissolved in 5 minutes of scrolling through text messages. The last message glowed on the screen. "Miss you already." Such simple words, weaponized into pure pain. I wondered how many times she'd sent me the same message, if they'd meant as little then as they obviously did now. I moved through our apartment like a shadow of myself, each familiar corner now tainted with fresh pain. The coffee maker gurgled its morning ritual, but I couldn't stomach more than a few sips. That couch, my new bed, still held the indent of my body from another restless night. Lila appeared in the kitchen doorway, her usual grace replaced by hesitant steps. Her presence made the air heavy, suffocating. She reached for the sugar bowl, and I shifted away, maintaining the invisible barrier between us. "I made extra coffee," she offered, her voice small. "The way you like it." I grabbed my keys from the counter, my wedding band catching the morning light. The sight of it turned my stomach. 3 weeks ago, I'd sat on that damn couch, mindlessly scrolling through her iPad for a recipe she'd mentioned. Instead, I'd found messages that shattered everything I thought I knew about us. She followed me to the living room, her excuses trailing behind like a desperate echo. "You were working late every night. I felt invisible." Each word twisted the knife deeper. The same words she'd been repeating since I'd discovered the truth. The apartment felt smaller now, cramped with unspoken accusations and shattered trust. Photos of our happier days still hung on the walls, mocking reminders of what I thought we had. I'd stopped looking at them days ago. My laptop and work files remained scattered across the coffee table, evidence of my attempts to stay busy, to keep my mind from replaying every moment, searching for signs I must have missed. Each time Lila entered the room, I buried myself deeper in blueprints and project specs, building walls of paper between us. I didn't plan to confront him that day. The coffee shop had become my refuge these past weeks, a place to gather my thoughts and delay going back to an empty house filled with reminders of what I'd lost. The bitter aroma of fresh coffee and quiet chatter of strangers provided a comforting backdrop to my brooding. Then I saw him. Simon. His polished appearance and easy charm were exactly as I'd imagined from those photos I'd found on Lila's phone. He sat there in his tailored blazer, completely at ease, sharing what seemed like an entertaining story with a colleague. His animated gestures and confident smile drew attention from nearby tables. The same magnetism that had drawn my wife to him, no doubt. My coffee grew cold as I watched him, my mind replaying all those late nights Leela claimed to be working. The mysterious text messages, her growing emotional distance. The evidence had been there for months before I finally accepted it. Now, seeing him in person, everything crystallized with painful clarity. My body moved of its own accord, pulled by an invisible force toward his table. My heart pounded steadily in my chest, but my exterior remained calm, the same composed facade I'd maintained throughout this whole ordeal. His laughter cut off as I approached. I stood there, letting my presence sink in before speaking. "Simon, isn't it?" My voice came out steady, controlled, but glacial. The change in his expression was subtle, but immediate. The easy smile faltered, his eyes darting to the exits as recognition dawned. Gone was the self-assured man from moments ago, replaced by someone who suddenly looked smaller, cornered. "I'm Elliot!" I let those two words hang in the air between us. His colleague glanced between us, sensing the sudden tension. Simon's face drained of color. The guilt that flashed across his features confirmed everything I needed to know. He fumbled with his phone, muttering something about being late for a meeting. His hands shook slightly as he gathered his things, nearly knocking over his coffee cup in his haste to escape. I remained standing there, watching him retreat. His perfectly pressed blazer did nothing to disguise the slump in his shoulders as he practically fled the cafe. I stood in our living room, my hands trembling despite my efforts to keep them still. The late evening light cast long shadows across the floor, matching the darkness creeping into my thoughts. Lila sat on the edge of the couch, her makeup smeared from earlier tears, but I couldn't find any sympathy in my heart. "I saw him today," I said, my voice hollow. "Simon, at the cafe on 5th Street. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with recognition. "Please, Elliot," Lila pleaded, rising from the couch. "It's over. I ended things with him weeks ago." I paced across the hardwood floors, my architect's mind desperately trying to reconstruct a timeline I didn't want to see. "You chose me?" A bitter laugh escaped my throat. "When exactly did you make that choice, Lila? Before or after you started sleeping with him?" "I chose you," she repeated, voice cracking. "I ended things with him. That's what matters now." My fist connected with the wall before I realized what I was doing. The dull thud matched the pounding in my chest. What matters? What matters is you only ended it because I finally found out. Don't pretend this was some noble choice. The truth hung between us like poison. Every memory of the past month shifted, tainted by new context. "You didn't end it for me," I spat out. "You ended it because you got caught." The evening light cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the tears streaming down her cheeks. I hadn't seen her cry like this since her father passed away 3 years ago. "I can't keep doing this dance, Elliot." My chest tightened. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her like I used to, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear. The distance between us felt like a physical barrier. "I found this therapist," she continued, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her oversized sweater. "Dr. Harrison. She specializes in couples counseling." I shifted uncomfortably, my architect's mind already trying to structure a response, to build walls around my emotions. But Leela's vulnerability was breaking through my defenses. "She has great reviews, and her office is just 15 minutes from here." Lila pulled out her phone, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through something. "She has openings next week. I think we need this, Elliot. We need help." "Please say something," she whispered, her voice small and uncertain, so unlike the confident Lila I fell in love with. "Even if it's no, just say something." The raw desperation in her voice cut through me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her plea settle heavily in my chest. This wasn't just about finding a therapist. It was about us, about facing the cracks that had slowly been forming in our relationship. My mind raced through 1,000 thoughts, each one battling for dominance. Finally, I nodded, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Okay, Lila, let's do it. Let's get the help we need." It didn't work. I'm not sure what else I expected. I stared at the clock on my office wall, watching as it crept past 8 p.m. Another late night at the firm, drowning myself in blueprints and client revisions. The truth was, I couldn't face going home. Our weekly counseling sessions had become a battlefield where every word felt like ammunition. Last week's session still haunted me. Lila sat there, animated and forward-looking, talking about fresh starts and new chapters. But how could I move forward when the trust between us lay shattered on the floor? The counselor's office, with its muted colors and comfortable chairs, had become a stage where our fundamental differences played out in high definition. At home, the silence was deafening. We'd developed an intricate dance of avoidance. I'd wait to hear the shower running before entering our bedroom, timing my morning routine around her schedule. When we did cross paths, our interactions were choreographed with painful precision. "Coffee's ready," or "mail's on the counter," became our primary form of communication. The kitchen, once a space where we'd cook together and share our day's stories, transformed into a neutral zone. I'd find dishes in the sink from her dinner, eaten alone hours before I got home. Sometimes I'd wash them, just to have something to do with my hands that didn't involve thinking about us. During our rare moments at home together, Lila filled the space with constant motion and noise. Phone calls, music, Netflix shows I had no interest in watching. Her attempts to create normalcy only highlighted the abnormality of our situation. I retreated further into my work, taking on additional projects, volunteering for late-night client meetings. The office became my sanctuary, where complex architectural problems provided a welcome distraction from the crumbling foundation of my marriage. One evening, I found myself driving around the city after work, studying buildings I'd passed 1,000 times before, anything to delay the inevitable return to our shared space. Our home had become a museum of what we used to be, filled with artifacts of happier times that now felt like they belonged to different people entirely. I found the letter when I got home. The house was dark and quiet, save for the distant hum of the neighbor's AC unit. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the cream-colored paper, recognizing Lila's flowing handwriting immediately. Page after page she poured out explanations and apologies. Simon had been a distraction, she wrote, someone who made her feel special when she doubted herself. The words blurred together as I stood there in our dining room, still in my work clothes, my jacket growing heavy on my shoulders. The letter detailed moments I hadn't even known about. Coffee meetings, lingering conversations after work events, the gradual erosion of boundaries. Each confession felt like another crack in the foundation we'd built together. She wrote about how Simon's attention filled a void she hadn't realized existed, but that it meant nothing compared to our life together. My hand clenched the paper, creating small creases along the edges. Everything she wrote made logical sense. The way she broke down her actions, analyzed her motivations, pledged her devotion to our marriage. It was the kind of thoughtful introspection I'd always appreciated about her. But now those same qualities felt hollow, like architectural plans for a building that had already collapsed. The letter laid bare all her insecurities, her fear of not being enough, her assertion that Simon had just been there to validate what she couldn't find in herself. But as I read through it again, all I could think about was how love shouldn't need a thesis statement. Our relationship wasn't supposed to be a problem that needed solving. with bullet points and supporting evidence. The very existence of this letter, so carefully crafted, so precisely worded, felt like proof that something fundamental had broken between us. What started as a simple, "Hey, did you get the groceries?" had spiraled into a whole huge mess. Lila's excuses rang hollow. She'd been too busy with work, lost track of time, meant to do it tomorrow. The same pattern we'd been living through for months now. Small promises broken, little lies piling up like dust in corners you try to ignore until they suffocate you. It's just groceries, Elliot. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" Her voice carried that familiar defensive edge, the one that always made my jaw clench. The pressure had been building for weeks, months maybe, each minor disappointment, each moment of doubt stacking on top of the previous one. And suddenly, standing there in our kitchen with those empty bags between us, something inside me snapped. "I don't trust you. How can I ever trust you again?" The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. They hung in the air like shrapnel, and I watched them tear through her. Lila's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. She wrapped her arms around herself, something she always did when hurt, making herself smaller. But as I stood there watching her cry, I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her. No guilt. No pain. Just emptiness. The kind of void that opens up when you finally acknowledge a truth you've been running from. Whatever we'd been trying to salvage these past few months wasn't working. Like a building with a cracked foundation, each repair just masked the fundamental flaw beneath. In that moment of stark clarity, I saw our relationship for what it had become. Not a healing wound, but decay masquerading as recovery. It was rotten to the core. I felt an overwhelming urge to escape from everything that was weighing heavily on my mind, to find a moment of clarity amid the chaos, so I made the decision to take a break and immerse myself in nature, the only thing that I always truly enjoyed. The crisp mountain air hit my lungs, a welcome change from the stifling atmosphere at home. 3 hours of driving had given me too much time to think, but I needed this. The trail stretched before me, winding through towering pines. My boots crunched against the gravel path as I started my ascent. With each step, the sounds of civilization faded. No traffic, no phones, no awkward silences over dinner. I found a clearing after an hour of hiking, dropping my pack near a fallen log. The valley sprawled below, a patchwork of greens and browns under the autumn sky. My hands traced the rough bark, finding the familiar precision in its natural patterns. Just like in my blueprints, there was an order to things. Everything had its place, its purpose. The past months with Lila played through my mind like a badly edited film. I'd thrown myself into fixing things, approaching our marriage like a troubled project that just needed the right solutions. But sitting there in the mountain silence, watching an eagle circle overhead, the truth finally settled in my chest. I wasn't fighting for our love anymore. I was fighting for the idea of us, for the carefully constructed life we'd built. The betrayal had cracked our foundation, and no amount of architectural expertise could repair what was broken at its core. My wedding ring caught the sunlight, the gold band suddenly feeling heavy on my finger. 5 years of marriage, reduced to obligations and hollow routines. I took the ring off and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of its history pressing into my palm. With a deep breath, I hurled it off the cliff, watching as it disappeared into the abyss below. The sun glinted off the gold one last time before it was swallowed by the shadows. A final farewell to the life we'd built and the dreams that had crumbled. The wind whispered around me, carrying away the echoes of a promise that could no longer be kept. I walked through our front door that evening, my mind made up after weeks of internal struggle. The familiar scent of Lila's jasmine candles filled the air, but tonight it felt suffocating. I found her curled up on our gray sectional, scrolling through her phone, probably checking social media again. "We need to talk," I said. Oh. She looked up, her smile fading as she read my expression. I sat down on the coffee table across from her, our knees almost touching. The words I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head came out steady despite my racing heart. "I can't do this anymore." The weight of those words hung between us. I deserve someone who chooses me first, not as an afterthought. Tears welled up in her eyes. She reached for my hands, but I pulled back. "Please, Elliot, I can change. We can fix this." "There's nothing left to fix." I stood up and walked to our bedroom to pack. Her sobs followed me through the house as I gathered my essential belongings. When I walked past her toward the door, she grabbed my arm. "One more chance. That's all I'm asking for." I shook my head and left. The divorce process moved faster than I expected. We met at the lawyer's office multiple times, dividing up 8 years of shared life. She took the sectional, I kept the dining room set. We split the art collection we'd built together, each piece a reminder of weekend gallery visits and anniversaries. The final meeting was the hardest. Sitting across from each other at a sterile conference table, we signed the papers without speaking. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote her signature. I noticed she was wearing the silver bracelet I'd given her on our first anniversary, and something in my chest tightened. The scratch of pen on paper echoed in the quiet room. With each signature, our marriage dissolved into nothing more than courthouse records and memories. The city sprawled beneath my new apartment window, a maze of lights and shadows that felt oddly comforting in their anonymity. My drafting table sat in the corner, already covered in sketches, projects I'd put aside during the marriage, but now flowed freely from my pencil again. The space wasn't large, but every inch was mine, untainted by memories of betrayal. Old friends started showing up more frequently. Mike dropped by with takeout and stories about his travels. Sarah invited me to her art gallery openings. Even my brother Tom, who'd warned me about Lila years ago, began calling regularly just to check in. Lila's attempts to reach me became predictable, late-night texts, emails filled with apologies and promises to change. Each one stung less than the last. I'd blocked her number, but she found new ways to get through. A handwritten letter arrived last week, her familiar scrawl detailing how miserable she was without me. The old me would have crumbled, rushed to comfort her. Instead, I fed the pages into my paper shredder. My evenings took on a new rhythm. The basement workshop I'd always dreamed of having became reality in my new place, albeit scaled down. The smell of sawdust and sound of tools filled my weekends as I crafted furniture for my space. Lila showed up at my office once, makeup perfect but eyes red-rimmed. Security escorted her out while I stayed behind my closed door. My colleagues pretended not to notice, but their sidelong glances held something new. Respect, maybe. They'd seen me stand my ground. The weight of our failed marriage still pressed on my chest some nights, but it no longer crushed me. Each morning brought new designs, new possibilities, new versions of myself I never knew existed when I was trying to be who she wanted me to be. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.